Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. A stoic woman sits on the throne of Kyiv, her eyes fixed on the small group of emissaries standing before her. The news they bring is grim, yet her face remains hard, regal, and determined. The battle was a disaster. Her husband has been slain, his head brought to the king of the Derevlians, who fashioned it into a wine goblet. Derevlian forces are mobilized for war, eager to press their advantage. The Derevlian soldiers before her not only brought the news, but now they have the audacity to come to her court and demand that she marry their upstart king, surrender her power, unite their kingdoms under the banner of the man who murdered her husband. But this is Olya of Kyiv, descended from Norsemen, the daughter of Vikings, the princess regent of Kievan Rus, and she has no thoughts except revenge. With the wave of her hand, she has the Derevlian soldiers seized and burned alive. She tells her men to prepare her horse and mobilize for war. One day, Olya of Kyiv will be sainted, canonized by the patriarch of the Orthodox Church, and declared one of the great heroes of Christendom, equal to the apostles. But today, she demands vengeance. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here, of course, with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, how's it going for you?
It's going okay. How are you?
I'm doing okay. We have a revenge-filled story today that is very violent, but also weirdly divisive and political, considering that it deals with a woman who lived over 1,000 years ago. It kind of really highlights, the importance of language, Pat, which is something that you study a lot of.
Yeah. And the name of our figure itself is a little divisive, or at least symbolic.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? How much power names have, right? It's the he who should not be named kind of situation. But so the person we're talking about today, she is an Orthodox saint from the 900s who is still kind of relevant today for two completely, and is used in propaganda for two completely opposite reasons, interestingly. So I learned her name as Saint Olga of Kyiv. I was a Russian and Eastern European studies minor in college, and I first came across this story when I was doing, the history of Eastern Europe. And we're talking about a place called Kievan Rus, which was kind of the empire that was kind of the conglomeration of city-states that eventually grew into become both Ukraine and Russia claim it as the birthplace of their countries. And though it was settled primarily largely by Vikings from Sweden. So it's all over the place. And I encountered her name and have called her for years. For the majority of my life, I have known her as Saint Olga of Kyiv, which is how she's written in the primary chronicle, which is where a lot of the story exists. But it's not the only way that her name, not the only way that she's known. Her name in Old Norse was probably Helga, and the Russians called it Olga because that sounds a little more Russian to them. In Ukrainian, she's known as Olha of Kyiv, and she probably actually spoke Old Church Slavonic, and in that language, it doesn't exist anymore, it's Volya. And then when she was baptized, she took Elena as her Christian name. So it's a mess, Pat.
It is. You learned her name as Olga of Kyiv. I think we're going to try to call her Olha of Kyiv in this episode, but old habits die hard.
Old habits die hard. I will probably slip in and call her Olga every once in a while. There has been, over the past several years, a very strong push to use the Ukrainian versions of various names from Kievan Rus and from Kievan Belarus and, and in Ukraine, and for obvious reasons, which I understand, and we're going to try to adhere to that to the best of our ability. But it is very interesting in that how much like what you call a person from 1300 years ago, how much power that name still has and how much power that language still holds.
So who is this Saint Olha by any name?
Yes. So Saint Olha, Helga, I don't know, Elena, whatever we're going to, whatever. So after all of that preamble, we are going to talk about Saint Olha of Kyiv, who was she's like I've said, she's an Orthodox saint and, very pious woman who was also not in any way to be messed with. She was incredibly brutal and violent, and we're going to get into this awesome story of this princess descended from Vikings who enacts Viking vengeance on all of those who stand in her way. To quote the Russian primary chronicle that I mentioned a bit ago, it says, quote, "When the Derevlians arrived, Olya commanded that a bath should be made ready and invited them to appear before her after they had bathed. The bathhouse was then heated, and the Derevlians entered in to bathe. Olya's men closed up the bathhouse behind them, and she gave orders to set it on fire so that the Derevlians would all be burned to death." So
wow,
that's what we're talking about here. There's a lot of people dying in fire in the Olya of Kyiv story, so we're going to get into it here.
Yeah, let's find out more about who Olha is, and also who are these Derevlians, and why does she want to set them on fire?
So after this break, we'll get right back into it. So Olya of Kyiv was born in a town called Pskov, Pskov. I don't know how you would pronounce that. I don't know if you...
Pskov?
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, and this is in the very eastern part of what we now call Russia, near the Estonian border, if you're looking at a map.
Yeah, and it's kind of on the edge of what we know now as Kievan Rus, which was basically... They're called Varangians in some of the old texts, but they're Vikings. They're from Sweden and Norway, Denmark. Vikings liked to come down. They wanted to trade with Constantinople. And in order to get down there, you had to go down the Dnipro and the Volga rivers. And so they would be sailing down. And they eventually started setting up some settlements where, Vikings would live alongside the Slavs that lived there already. And so... This kind of conglomeration of city-states eventually becomes known as Kievan Rus, becomes a principality, and they have royalty as it goes. So Saint Olga is born probably around 890 CE. She was the daughter of some of these aristocratic Viking colonists who had come from Sweden, probably. And she ends up marrying a guy named Prince Igor of Novgorod in 903. He's also known by his Norse name, which is Ingvar. Igor is the son of Rurik, who is the Viking guy who basically initially set up this Kievan Rus society. Rurik is a guy who might be a little bit mythological, but the story goes that he had come down the river, settled in Kyiv, and there were some people living there, and they were having an argument. Maybe I can have these Vikings help me against this guy. Maybe I can. And there were some infighting in the city, and they invited Rurik the Viking to come help them, and he resolved this problem by basically killing everybody and taking over and making himself the king. So that's Rurik. Rurik's son is named Igor, and Igor is now the husband of an aristocratic Varangian woman named Olya. When Rurik dies, it's around 912. Igor becomes the king, the ruler of Kievan Rus, and Olya is the princess or the queen. He's called the Prince of Novgorod because they didn't want to call themselves kings because there's all kinds of politics involved with that. So
yeah, but prince, that's a safe title. And if you're married to a prince, you are a princess.
Yes,
so
she's a princess, but she's the main person, right? The main queen.
Yeah.
But she doesn't want to call herself that because it gets weird. So Igor does some stuff around Kyiv and Novgorod. These are the two biggest settlements in Kievan Rus at the time. But in 945 AD, he tries to kind of like, he's doing a very Viking thing. He's fighting his enemies and conquering them and making them pay tribute to him. And he tries to double dip with a group of guys called the Derevlians. They are a Slavic tribe, and Derevlia is... Well, we don't know, Pat, where Derevlia is.
No, it seems like Derevlian territory kind of covers parts of modern-day Ukraine, modern-day Belarus. Their capital city is modern-day Korostin, which, according to Google Maps, is a little over 2 hours drive, or a day and a half walking west-northwest of Kyiv. I'm not sure how long it would take on horseback, but the territory, whatever the exact boundaries of the Drevlian territory, it's too close for comfort with Igor and Olha and our Kievan Rus pals.
Yeah, and Kievan Rus is in charge here, and they have extracted tribute from the Derevlians, but Igor, he's spending a lot of money and he needs more. And he decides he's going to go back to these Derevlians with his army and get some more money out of them. Well, the Derevlians don't like it. The king of the Derevlians at this time is Mal, spelled M-A-L. So I might kind of switch between pronouncing it like Darth Maul and like Mal from Firefly as I go through the story. It's like Olya, how there's just different ways of saying the name. So King Mal responds by ambushing Prince Igor and his entourage. He kills the honor guard, he splits Igor in half by tying him between two trees, decapitates him, scoops his brains out of his head, dips the skull into molten gold, turns it into a decorative wine goblet, and shows it off at dinner parties. That's what he does. He decapitates Prince Igor and turns his head into a sippy cup.
Yay. I'm thinking of some Halloween decorations I've purchased at Target over the years. Like
it's a Halloween candy bowl.
Yes, but that was, I don't know, $5 and made out of plastic. And I don't think any actual humans were killed in the making of my Halloween decorations.
Well, I mean, this worked out well for King Mal of the Derevlians. He'd won. He protected his people from a foreign ruler. He saved his civilization from paying unreasonable tribute. He stopped an enemy tyrant, and he vanquished the Prince of Kyiv once and for all. And then he pushed his luck a little too far.
Uh-oh, King Mal, what are you going to do?
King Mal, you got to quit when you're ahead, buddy. He sent a team of 20 ambassadors to Kyiv for two reasons. First, they were going to tell Princess Olya that her husband was dead. He'd met an untimely sword-related demise, and now his head was being used as a fancy container for alcoholic beverages. And second, he was going to demand her hand in marriage to unite the kingdoms of Kyiv and Derevlia into one powerful Viking Slavic empire. So, Pat, I'm going to give you two guesses, knowing just what you know from that original paragraph. I'm going to give you two guesses what Olya, a born and bred Viking warrior woman who only had a sense of humor when it came to setting people on fire, what do you think she did when they proposed a marriage to her?
Oof. I'm guessing that this did not go over well with her. And I'm guessing that she might respond not necessarily by using her words, but maybe by using fire and pointy objects.
Fire and blood. Yeah. Oh yeah. Now she's in charge. The king is dead. The prince is dead. And the heir is 3 years old. It's their son, Sviatoslav, who's 3 and isn't old enough to make decisions for himself. So she's going to regent for Sviatoslav until he's old enough. And she kind of she's just been informed of the death of her husband, and his murderer is now asking for her hand in marriage. So she actually is a little bit calculated. This is a cool thing that we're going to see about Saint Olya. She's not immediately flying to a rage, fire and blood. Mm-hmm. She thinks about it a second, and she's like, I'll quote again from this primary chronicle. Your proposal is pleasing to me. Indeed, my husband cannot rise again from the dead. But I desire to honor you tomorrow in the presence of my people. Return to your boat and remain there with an aspect of arrogance. I shall send for you on the morrow, and you shall say, we will not ride on horses or go on foot. Carry us in our boat, and you shall be carried into the city in your boat.
That's an interesting move.
Yeah.
So this speech of Olya that you've given us, it's from the Russian Primary Chronicle, and this is a useful source for the period. It's a chronicle of Kievan Rus from around the years 850 to 1100, and it's attributed to the same monk, Nestor the Chronicler, who wrote several other works of Kievan Rus history and also some biographies of saints. It might not be 100% reliable as a historical source, but it's definitely a good source for stories. And speaking of stories, how are these Drevlian ambassadors in our story doing now that Olya has told them, and you shall be carried in your boat?
They are happy about this. That sounds awesome. I can go home. I can go back to my boat because they came in on the river. So like you were saying, the Drevlians were probably north of here. So these guys had come by boat, probably down the Dnipro. And so they go back to their boat. And they're sitting there and they're excited. And then the next day, the people of Kievan Rus show up and the ambassadors get to say their line of, you got to carry us in our boat. And this group of big, strong Vikings and Slavs, this big strong Kievan people, they say, okay, we'll carry you on. They lift them up out of the water. They put them on their shoulders or on carts or whatever. And they parade the Drevlian ambassadors through the streets of Kyiv in a triumphant parade. And
this sounds like fun. If I were a Drevlian ambassador, I'd be excited, right?
Yeah, it's like a carnival float, They're getting traveled down the main street. People are kind of standing there watching them, like the city's turned out for it. This is exciting. And then they kind of are going down towards town hall, and then they make a left, and they start to go away from the palace, and the Drevlians sitting on the boat are kind of looking around, and then they realize that the road kind of ends at this big hole. I'm like, that doesn't look right. And they get a little closer to the hole, and then the Drevlians like, maybe I should get out of this. Something's not right here. And then the big strong men of Kyiv throw the boat into the giant hole that they dug overnight and start to fill it up with dirt, burying these guys alive under tons of dirt and rocks. And that's the end of these 20 ambassadors. They're pelted with rocks and dirt, dropped into a hole they can never climb out of. And we've never found them. There's no sign of them has ever been, or this boat has ever been uncovered.
Wow. So it feels like a victory parade turns into being buried alive.
Yeah, it's I think on Ukrainian Independence Day, there was, I think President Zelensky did a speech about Ukrainian independence, and he said that the Russians wanted to do a parade down the main street of Kyiv, and he's standing in front of a bunch of burned out tanks on the main street of Kyiv. That's what it makes me think of. So a little bit of that happening here. The grave has never been discovered, which could point to your thing that the sources might be unreliable, or it could point to the fact that these Kievan dudes dug a really, really big hole.
I mean, if they're strong enough to carry a boat on their shoulders through the streets of the city, maybe they could dig a huge ditch overnight.
Yeah.
Especially if they were highly motivated.
Yeah. Speaking of highly motivated, St. Olya is not done yet. So these Drevlians have shown up. They've told her husband is dead, and that she should marry the guy who ordered his execution and is currently drinking wine out of a skull-shaped mug made out of this guy's head. So she has those ambassadors buried alive. Then she thinks on her feet. She sends a messenger of her own to the capital of Drevlia, to King Mal himself, with a message. And that message is, yes, Olya would love to marry you. Send all of your greatest warriors to Kyiv so that they can escort his future wife back to Drevlia for all the great marriage stuff. This is going to be really fun. And King Mal eats it up. He is, I don't know. King Mal is kind of being catfished a little bit here, and he's a little bit
catfish. That's one way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a little bit too enthusiastic about it, and he's very excited that this beautiful Viking princess wants to marry him.
Yes, and so he's got stars in his eyes. He's singing to himself, putting on some axe, and he has no idea.
A literal axe, not axe body spray.
Okay, yeah. But maybe he wants to smell nice too while he's, holding an axe. But he has no idea what's happened to his ambassadors, who are currently under several feet worth of dirt.
Yeah. The messenger's like, oh no, they're fine. Don't worry about it. Those messengers, like, they're having a party right now. They're too busy with all of the wine and beautiful women to return, but they'll come back with us. We'll all come back together. It'll be fine. And so King Mal's like, yes. So he gets his honor guard of all of his best troops, which you'll remember that Prince Igor was traveling with all of his best troops in an honor guard as well, and those guys also didn't make it back. So there's a little bit of
foreshadowing.
Yes, a little bit of foreshadowing.
If this were a work of fiction, this would be foreshadowing.
Yes. And so King Mal sends all of his honor guard, his elite troops, to the gates of Kyiv, where they are greeted by the captain of Olya's royal guard. And this is where we get that quote from the beginning, where the captain of the royal guard says, yes, the princess will receive you. She is currently washing her hair and doing her makeup, I guess. So why don't you guys go take a bath? And then you can be, it's been a long journey. You'll take a bath here. Then you'll be all nice to meet the princess, and we'll all ride back together in our best gear. And these guys say, okay, yeah, that sounds great. We'll go to the Kievan baths. That sounds pretty great.
Yeah, that sounds great, actually.
Yeah, Vikings were actually, like, weirdly really well known for their baths and for bathing. You don't think about that when you think about Vikings, but it was a common complaint that the Anglo-Saxons had about the Vikings, is that all of the Anglo-Saxon women preferred Viking men because they bathed once a week.
Hey.
It's dating tips. Badass of the week dating tips. Bathe once a week.
Yes, bathe at least once a week. Yes, yeah. And these Kievan baths, recommended by Princess Olga herself, they're probably pretty nice. I mean, I'm imagining a sauna attached to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Viking bath, right? So, like sauna kind of deal, like, Swedish resort style. Is also kind of what I'm envisioning. So these guys go and they're getting washed up and they're in the sauna kind of deal, and it's getting a little hot and it's getting a little hotter. And it's starting to sweat, getting a good sweat on. And then there's some smoke, which there always kind of is in a sauna. But then there's a little bit of crackling, a little bit of black smoke, a little bit of, oh no, the door's locked. Now we're no.
This is not aromatherapy we're talking about here.
This is death by smoke inhalation we're talking about here. This building is on fire and it's barred from the outside. And anybody who actually manages to get even an arm out is going to get stabbed by a big army of dudes standing outside waiting to kill everybody. And then those guys all die. They die. They die of smoke inhalation or burn to death in the world's hottest sauna. And then Saint Olya, who remember is a Orthodox saint, will be remembered by history as a saint and a very pious and holy woman. She shows up to kind of make sure that the deed was done, and is very pleased to see that everybody is burned up.
Now, that's what's happening in Kyiv, and we know what's going on in Kyiv. But back in Korosten, back in Drevlian territory, how's King Mal doing? Does he know what's going on? Does he have any inkling of what's going on for real? Not what all his messengers are telling him?
So he gets another messenger. Funnily enough, another Kievan messenger arrives at the court of King Mal and says, everything's going great. All of your people are there. We're all assembled. All of your guys and Princess Olya are on the way right now. So get ready, because they're going to be here really soon. Start making all of your wedding preparations. The only thing that she requests along the journey here is that she wants to visit the city where her husband died, to pay last respects to him, burn the body, do all of the things that you have to do. She can't marry this new guy until she's laid the old husband to rest. And, it's a very, very queenly, princessy thing to do. We'll have a funeral for him. We'll burn the body, and we'll have a big feast to commemorate his death. So what I need is a nice structure, and then a bunch of meats, cheeses, mead, and kind of have like a big party set up for us. And we'll all sit there and we'll all eat together. Okay. All right. Yeah. He sounds like that sounds great. That's wonderful. I'll get it all set up. I'll make all the arrangements. Olya of Kyiv rides out with her army, but she orders them to stay a little bit behind, far enough that they won't be seen or heard. After that, she rides into the town where this party is going to be and where the funeral is going to be held. She goes by herself. And we'll tell you about what happened right after this message from our sponsor. All right, so Olya has ridden to the party without her army. She left it behind a ways. She rides in her princessly finest, on her horse. She rides into town with roses, and she throws them on the tomb of her late husband, pays her respects. And then she goes to this big party by herself. There are, according to some versions of the story, 5,000 Derevlian noblemen, warriors, slaves, peasantry, whatever. It's a huge,
lots of people,
huge building full of Derevlians who have created this massive feast for her to kind of honor her and prepare her for the great wedding they're going to have. And everybody is kind of drinking and having a good time. Olya probably has a couple of her bodyguards with her because she would in this scenario.
But effectively she's by herself.
Yeah, effectively by herself. A couple trusted men with her, but she's eating and everybody's partying and drinking and they're having this great, blowout rager party. And then at one point, everybody's kind of good and drunk, and some Derevlian nobleman, some higher ranking guy in the court of King Mal, he's had a little too much to drink, and he leans over to Olya and he's like, "Hey, how come you didn't bring more guys with you? Did you ride all this way by yourself with just a couple of people?" Bam! All of the doors to the banquet hall are kicked open, and several thousand heavily armored, screaming Viking warriors with battle axes and swords come rushing in, screaming war cries of their Norse ancestors, screaming for vengeance of their fallen king, and they just red wedding this entire party. Nobody gets out alive. No one lives. Everybody is slaughtered that is inside this building. They're the great warriors of King Mal, but they're not armed for war. They're not wearing their armor. They're not. There's nothing.
No, they're drunk. They're stuffed with really good food. Some of them are probably going into food comas or were going into food comas.
Not expecting to be brained in the back of the head with a 6-foot war axe.
Yeah, Olga has laid her trap.
Yes. And she just keeps this guy, King Mal. He's just, I don't know if the kids would say so thirsty, but I don't know. He's like, he just keeps getting played. He just keeps getting punked by Queen Olya. And he's still sitting back in his court, just really excited for her to show up. And, then he's sitting in his court, and then he gets word that there's an army approaching up the main road, and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm expecting them." And the messenger, the guy on the wall, is like, "No, it's not what you're expecting. It's not. Remember those 10,000 guys you sent out? It's not them." Mm-hmm. It's a big Viking army, and they're gonna surround. The capital here has like wooden walls. It's not like a big medieval stone fortress. This is like a wooden palisade, and the Viking army shows up, and only now does King Mal realize that he's been catfished as the Vikings encircle his capital and begin digging trenches and siege works and things like that. And Mal, he knows when he's beaten. He offers terms of surrender to Olya. Okay, actually, double dipping that tribute, not so bad. I don't have any more money, but I will do anything you need to please not kill everybody in town, and including me. So
how does Olga respond? Does she respond with violence, or does she respond with another ruse?
Oh, so she responds, well, she says she doesn't want to kill everybody. She doesn't want to kill King Mal. She doesn't want to annihilate his city. But she can't leave here empty-handed. That is not princessly of her to show up with this army and have you beaten, and just, if you're not going to pay me more money because you don't have it or whatever, you have to give me something. There has to be some offering of dirt and water or something. So she said, okay, well, I want one flying bird for each household in the city, and we'll call it even. Just bring me the birds of your city and I will take them. King Mal and his people, they're pretty happy. They're not going to die. These Vikings are going to leave. All we got to do is collect some birds. So they get
birds? We've got birds?
Yeah, they got birds. They got birds here. So they've got all kinds of doves, pigeons, sparrows, crows, that kind of stuff. All kinds of birds from the city who just kind of, cities, as they do to this day, collect birds. And
yes.
And they assemble all of these birds into their cages and they give them to Olya, and she says, okay. And you know what? She leaves.
That's it?
You look a little suspicious right now.
Well, okay, if I were King Mal, I would be very suspicious right now. But I'm not King Mal. And King Mal seems like he misses opportunities to think critically.
That's a very diplomatic way to put that. Yes, King Mal misses opportunities to think critically. King Mal is I would call him a naive idiot, but I think the way you said it is probably better. Yeah, Olya gets about a mile away from town, and she ties little bits of cloth or paper or whatever to all these birds, lights them on fire, and then lets all the birds go. And
ooh.
Yeah,
and these birds, where do they go?
These birds are all on fire, and they go to the place that they know best. So they all fly home. So all of these flaming birds return to this wooden palisade, thatched roof cottages, mostly made out of wood and straw city of the Derevlians while they're on fire, and try to go back to what they know, and they all catch various buildings and structures and things on fire, and the entire city catches on fire and burns to the ground.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to a previous episode where we told the story of Jeremy, the pigeon in World War II.
Yeah.
Now her job, I forget Jeremy's gender, was delivering messages, and that's a fairly benign thing. All Jeremy had was a little message tied to their leg.
Yeah, it's like that, except you set that on fire. It's like the opposite of saving the Lost Battalion. It's annihilating an entire city.
Yes.
And so everybody dies. The place gets caught on fire. Anybody who escapes gets killed by Vikings. King Mal dies. That's the end of King Mal. That's the end of the Derevlians. Like you said, we don't really know exactly where they lived, and this is probably part of why, because they ceased to kind of exist after this. I like to envision that Olya just walked away from the explosion without looking back, like you see in those movies, kind of slow-mo walk away while the city just blows up behind her. That's kind of how I picture this going down.
Okay, so we've set the Derevlian city on fire. We've walked away. We don't look back. What's going on now? What's going on back in Kyiv? Okay,
so the things progress for a few years. We're going to fast forward several years here. Baby Sviatoslav, she's avenged her husband's death. I assume she gets the cup back. I don't know what happens to the cup, but I imagine she would have it or do something with it. And return it to the tomb, maybe. I'm not sure. It's no more mention is made of the cup, but I'm very curious what happened to it.
Yes.
But anyway, Sviatoslav is now old enough to take over as king. And he takes over, and he's doing the very good, Viking Kievan Rus thing and going on military campaigns to expand the empire. So he's gone a lot. He's leaving, and he's having battles. Olya's older now, but she had... He couldn't take over until he was somewhere in the 14 to 16 realm. So she's got over a decade, 2 decades at this point of administration experience running things as the queen. And she starts to do some reform stuff in Kievan Rus. She sets up the first taxation system in Eastern Europe, which is pretty cool. She builds the first stone structures in Kyiv and Novgorod as well. And Sviatoslav, he liked doing the Viking things. He liked murder, plunder, destruction. He didn't really care that much about ruling things and building structures. So he kind of left he was happy to leave all of that power to Olya in an official capacity. So remember I said she's an Orthodox saint. So that happens in around 957 AD or CE when she goes by ship to Constantinople to meet the Byzantine Emperor. And she ends up deciding to convert to Orthodox Christianity. She meets Emperor Constantine VII, and she determines that, she was kind of she's living in an area where she's probably Viking pagan, but a lot of the people around her have different religious beliefs. The Slavs that she's ruling over have different religious beliefs. And the closest, most powerful neighbor to them is Constantinople. So the best way to not only forge alliance with your powerful neighbor and improve your relationship with the people is to unify the religions. So she opts to, that's not how she puts it, and that's certainly not how the primary chronicle puts it. But she gets personally baptized by
the way we can look at it. Yeah.
The emperor wants to convert her, and she says she'll do it, but only if the emperor himself performs the baptism, which he does. Which also,
and I guess you can do that apparently.
Apparently, so I think when you're the emperor, you can do whatever you want.
True, fair point. Yeah.
So
he baptizes her.
Yeah. So he baptizes her. And then he says, maybe the best way for us to further cement our alliance is for us to get married. And so the emperor of Byzantium proposes marriage to her. And she responds by quoting a kind of obscure bit of Orthodox catechism where she's like, oh, actually, you're not allowed in the Orthodox faith. You're not allowed to marry the person who baptized you. And he's like, oh, yeah, I guess that's in the book, huh? And she's like, all right, see ya. I'm out of here.
So she gets her alliance or copacetic relations with a big, powerful neighbor. And she also maintains her personal freedom.
Yeah, she doesn't have to marry the guy because if she married the guy, he was going to for sure send Byzantines to Kyiv to take over the thing, right? That's how you end up. That's how you end up with a Boudica situation, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So now she's in charge. Sviatoslav's off doing his thing. He's fighting people. He's in Poland, I think, fighting over there, like present day Poland, I guess, or I guess at this point it would be like, Western Ukraine, somewhere in that region, fighting it out with people. But while he's out west doing battle, a group of steppe warriors known as the Pechenegs, they arrive in 968 outside Kyiv.
Oh, and by steppe warriors, we mean STEPPE, like people from that part of Central Eurasia, not steppe like stepmother or stepfather.
Oh, steppe warriors. Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Because we've been talking about relations by marriage.
That's fair.
Yeah. Okay, so steppe warriors from further east on the continent.
Yeah.
These are the Pechenegs.
Yeah, so the Pechenegs. So Olya has avenged her husband. She has converted her people to Orthodox, which makes her a saint among her people. Everybody loves her. She's much older now, though. She's in her 80s at this point. Her son is a strapping lad now. He's in his 50s or 60s, I think. He's off fighting.
Well, thank you on behalf of our older listeners for considering 50 or 60 strapping young.
I hadn't quite done the math yet, but I got it's fine.
Okay.
I'm gonna keep it.
No, I like it. And this is Olga, and she's still rocking it at 80. So why shouldn't her son be rocking it at age 50 or 60 or whatever?
This dude's been on military campaigns since he was like 16. So I'm guessing he's a ripped 60. Yeah, I'm thinking he's been keeping in shape, right? He's been swinging a lot of swords over the last couple of decades. So
here on Badass, we give you not only dating advice but also workout advice.
Yeah, exactly. Which becomes dating advice if you
leverage it.
Yeah, exactly. If you swing a lot of swords when you're 60, you probably look pretty good. So anyway, he's gone. He's gone with the army, and Saint Olya is now here, and these Pechenegs show up, and like you said, steppe warriors. So picture Mongols, Turks, picture Attila the Hun. We're talking like lightly armored guys on horseback with mean bow and arrows, that kind of style. And these guys arrive within like striking distance of Kyiv, and Olya is like, uh-oh, somebody failed. Some intelligence thing failed here. And now the Pechenegs arrive and they encircle the capital. And she is there with her 3 little baby grandchildren who were infants at the time, and all of her people and the city that she's built up her whole life. And they're surrounded by freaking Attila the Hun's guys now. So what do you do here? You're in big trouble. The army's gone.
Well, okay, this is Olga. So I'd say there's a, I don't know, 30 to 50% chance at least that she will come up with some sort of subterfuge involving fire.
Well, you are right about subterfuge. She's a saint now, so she can't go burning everybody. But if she had the opportunity to burn all these guys, I'm sure she would consider it or probably do it. But what she does is, first she kind of rallies the people, don't surrender. We're going to resist the barbarians. We're going to resist the Pechenegs. So she sends a messenger. This guy sneaks out of town, a Kievan guy sneaks out of town, swims across the Dnipro, and links up to a pretty small garrison of Kievan troops that are stationed on the other bank of the river, on the east bank of the river. So it's a little outpost, kind of like a garrison, little guard station here. And they're massively outnumbered by the Pechenegs, not very many guys. And Olya orders them to return to the capital. And what she ends up doing is she tells them to kind of crest this hill and everybody wave a flag and blast their trumpet and make a lot of noise and run your horses in circles to make a bunch of dirt, make a bunch of dust, and make as much noise as you can as you crest this hill and get to the top of the hill and wait for me.
And make it look like there are a lot of people, a lot of trumpets, a lot of horses.
Yeah, a lot of screaming and yelling. Make it sound like there's a lot of you. And so what happens is the Pechenegs have surrounded Kyiv, and this over the hill on this crest, you hear the trumpets and the horses and the stampeding and the yelling, and you see these banners arrive, and the front gates of Kyiv are flung open, and standing there by herself is 80-year-old Saint Olga of Kyiv, her arms out as though she's welcoming her son back from conquests on the frontier, and makes this big display of it for the Pechenegs who are all around watching. And the Pechenegs run away. They think that it's Prince Sviatoslav returning with the massive army. They thought they caught him off guard, but he's here and he's coming from the direction they weren't expecting it. He's behind them. They got to run. They've lost, and they run away. And Kyiv is saved.
Woohoo!
Olya then sends a letter to a messenger, said, go find my son, deliver this letter to him. And the letter demands that Sviatoslav return immediately and avenge the disgrace of having his capital besieged by Pechenegs. So he does. He rides back and he fights them and he defeats them, kills their chief, slaughters their army. And then Olya gets news that she's been avenged, and dies shortly thereafter with a smile on her face.
Good for her. Yes. Good for her.
She's given a good Christian burial. She dies in her mid to late 80s, and is declared not only an Orthodox saint, but also equal to the apostles, which is an honor that has only been given to a very select group of women in the history of the Orthodox Church.
Yeah, and to show you what sort of company she's in, theologically speaking, some of the other equal to the apostle women were Mary Magdalene and Photine, the Samaritan woman from the well in the Gospel of John, Thecla, who may have helped write one of the apocryphal Acts of the Apostles with St. Paul, Helena, mother of Constantine the Great.
Because, of course, he made his mom the equal to the apostles.
I mean, yeah, best Mother's Day gift ever, I suppose. Like, hey, Mom, I could take you out for brunch, or
make you equal
I could give you a theological honor. Yeah. And Saint Nino, who is the woman who brought orthodoxy to Georgia. So there's definitely a trend towards, or not a trend, but there's a priority for people who spread the good word, people who bring Christianity to populations that were not previously Christian. And that's our Olha.
Yeah. It's a couple people who spread orthodoxy, and it's a couple of women who literally appear in the Bible.
Yeah. And this gives us some context for our Olha, because, she did some things that by my personal standards might not be that saintly. There's a lot of killing people, a lot of burning people with fire, and yet she is still canonized and given these great honors.
And she is a powerful symbol in, as we talked about in the intro, she's a powerful symbol in several countries. So Kievan Rus kind of becomes not just, is claimed not just by Ukraine and Russia, but Belarus and some of the other neighboring countries. Her grandson, one of the little infants that was in Kyiv when it was surrounded by pechenegs, he goes on to become King Vladimir the Great, who is, a hero in all of those countries as well. And it's very interesting how she's kind of portrayed now because, I don't want to get too much into it, but an interesting thing is she kind of represents Ukrainian resistance in a lot of ways. So she's being represented by Ukraine as I've defended Kyiv. I'm from Kyiv, and I defended it against all foreign opponents. And I urged you to fight and to defend the city, and all of these kind of what would be obvious parallels. But Russia likes to point to her as well, and to Kievan Rus, because one of the settlements later on in Kievan Rus is Moscow. And these people, and so Russia likes to point to Kievan Rus as an example of we're all the same people, we all came from the same place, so we're all Russia, which is kind of the opposite of what the Ukrainians are doing with her. So it's an interesting thing about Olga of Kiev versus Olya of Kyiv, and how, how we can kind of manipulate history to tell the story that we want to tell. And how language is involved with that as well, which is kind of interesting. Olya, for her part, didn't have any problems that she couldn't handle by coming up with a clever plan and then probably setting some people on fire, which is pretty badass.
It is.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. If you are enjoying the podcast, please do subscribe. Please share it with your friends, like it, leave a comment. It really, really helps us out.
Spread the word like St. Olha.
Yes, but with a lot less fire.
Thanks for listening. Stay badass. Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are Andrew Jacobs, me, Pat Larish, and my co-host, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and Ben. Story editing is by Ian Jacobs, Brandon Phibbs. Mixing and music and sound design is by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeart. Badass of the Week is based on the website badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions, ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like the podcast, subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and your enemies if you want, as we'll be back next week with another one. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.